Hi guys, so this is the promised sequel to the video that I recorded and released yesterday about TI perfectionism and NI perfectionism. I said that I would have to divide this video into two. I'm recording it straight away because it's already in my mind, which is why I'm dressed the same as I was yesterday. I just wanted to give you a bit of breathing room because I'm aware that I covered certain concepts that were perhaps like a little bit heavy going, or I moved quickly from topic to topic using a little bit of jargon. Hopefully, if you're a little bit lost, let me know in the comments and we can try to clarify that together. Okay, so but just as a very brief recap, we were talking about how usually type perfectionism is associated with TI dominance, and to a very slightly lesser extent, which might not be deserved to be lesser, FI dominance. We focus on TI dominance for purposes of simplifying our comparisons, right? So, but through the question that CL Strife was asking, it got me to realize there is a real NI perfectionism. It's not as obvious to people usually because it's not as intuitive to understand unless you really understand how the mind of an NI dominant works. In this video, we'll also be touching on, because I think I'll have a bit of time for that, what then ultimately separates the INFJ from the INTJ, because there are mostly similarities, almost like identities between those two types when it comes to perfectionism, but there is a bifurcation that happens toward the end of the analysis, and we'll be looking at that together. So the TI, obvious inability or difficulty with finishing projects due to high perfectionism, taking very long time to complete a particular album, particular book, particular project of whatever kind, because they want what they come up with to really just correspond to this TI consistency, coherency, and essentialistic idea of what they have in their minds. NI dominance, they don't do that, partly because they don't have this refresh function that's high enough, at least auxiliary extrovert perception allows them to do with an atomistic mind, move from project to project. NI dominance can't really do that because they don't have access to the refresh function because their SE is inferior. So how do you see the perfectionism, which again I defined as this need that an NI dominant feels to project into external reality something that contains a structure, which structure is a perfect representation of the holism that defines the structure of their NI world itself. So their NI worldview has a structure, holistic structure, with its own, kind of coherence and consistency, but it's a question of holistic consistency, parts fitting together so as to form a whole, and being able to manifest it in external reality. That's the creative aspect that then can lead us to ask ourselves about perfectionism. So what you'll notice with NI dominance is the fact that it is this holism that is driving our perfectionism, is that instead of just having like lots of different projects that we're moving from one to the next, to the next, to the next, in fact, what you see is, and this is very indicative of NI dominance, so do pay attention, you see NI creators, NI people who bring things into the world, as in a sense constantly revisiting the same works. That is to say that sometimes literally, like Walt Whitman, for example, if you know the poet Walt Whitman, like he basically worked on Leaves of Grass for his entire career. Like he went through 12 or 13 or 15 different editions, constantly improving upon it. You could not imagine that like a high extrovert perceiver could do that. They would just be moving from project to project, like Franz Kafka, like I don't know, like Radiohead, like the band members behind Radiohead, something like that. But in the case of look at Tom York's body language, very TI dominant, or very JI dominant. In the case of Walt Whitman, no, like it's constantly just returning to Leaves of Grass, in the impossibility to do anything else. That's an extreme example. What you see more often, it's easy to see with filmmakers and with writers, is that they do write different books, but those books are always revisiting the same theme and the same leitmotifs, and you can see that what the author is really doing at some level is sort of fine-tuning more and more the correspondence between the structure of their NI world and what they're producing. If you look at Dostoevsky, like Dostoevsky wrote lots of books, Crime and to just cite briefly the most famous: Crime and Punishment, the Brothers Karamazov, the Possessed, and the Idiot. A lot of people who've read Dostoevsky will tell you that, well, all those books are phenomenal, but also there are not that many ideas in Dostoevsky. Meaning to say, of course, there's lots of content, lots to think about. It's one of the deepest writers you'll come across. But he's preoccupied with a limited set of ideas that he plumbs to the deepest depths, but keeps returning. There's a circle here, and that's the annihilism at work. We know that Dostoevsky was an I-dominant. You see that with musicians that seem to constantly return to the same kinds of contents as well. You see that, for example, with Nick Cave, if you're familiar with him. But there's many other musicians that you can take. With filmmakers like Andrei Tarkovsky, again, very much concerned with the same things, returning to them. So you see the difference. The perfectionism takes a different form, but it's there. There's a structure, and it has to be projected into reality, as another structure that is, what's form is obviously different because it's made of external reality stuff, but it has to have the same structure. That's where the perfectionism comes from. That's why a lot of INFJs, a lot of NI-dominants will never really come up with any project ever. So instead of having like sort of string of unfinished projects like a TI-dominant perfectionist would, a lot of INFJs would just be content with staying within their NI world, because at least they know that this holism has the consistency they're looking for. It's reassuring, they'll stay there. That's often the solipsistic mode, right? Whereas if you're going to project it, take the spiritualized route, take the liberated route, well, then you have to face the extra challenge of how are you going to be able to reproduce what you are so comfortable with in your own mind. So that requires making a leap in a way and confronting a certain state of existential anxiety. The results are very fruitful and they are conducive to a higher stage of life, I'm convinced of it, but it's a challenge too, and many INFJs have to grapple with it. Quick note as to what differentiates INFJs and INTJs. Well, INTJs tend to be more productive at particular projects. They tend to make more things happen in the world. And ultimately, I think the reason must be that TE is less concerned with how these works are going to be perceived, less concerned with the validation of the third party or the tribe than INFJs are. So INFJs and INTJs are going to be facing quite similar challenges here because they have equally holistic minds. And they're going to have a level of perfectionism that is very, very similar in how it is articulated. But the TE approach will be less social as a particular project, which means also less concerned with how it's perceived. So in a sense, a little bit less sensitive about how it's perceived, because it's hard to be an INFJ because you project this NI world into reality. It doesn't just have to be validated by yourself in terms of how its internal structure is a faithful representation of what you have in your mind. You're going to be sensitive to what other people think of it. And furthermore, what other people think of it is going to be partly defining how you yourself interpret it. So there's an extra layer of complexity here, moving through the subjectivities of other people, intersubjectivity that defines FE, whereas INTJs can sort of like plow through and, just ignore that particular hurdle and just bulldozer through that issue because TE allows them to do that. Okay? So hopefully I was able to discuss all this in depth. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed those videos discussing NI perfectionism by comparison with TI perfectionism. Give me a like if you enjoyed the vid. Don't forget that if you want to explore these topics in more depth, I have 2 books on the INFJ. My first book, The Ecstatic Soul, a new look at the INFJ personality, which looks at very, very in-depth, more in-depth than any other work, at the inside of INFJ, the INFJ mind, what it's like to be an INFJ with an INFJ consciousness and how it manifests existentially. And if you understand, what it is to have an INFJ mind, the Infinite Soul looks at how that interacts with external reality, a world today that we often find hostile, and yet how can we find meaning, purpose, and value, and how do we concretely operate in external reality? It's called The Infinite Soul, INFJ Life in the Modern World. It's my latest book. Got great reviews. If you have loved the book but haven't reviewed it yet, please consider it. Helps with the referencing. And as usual, my Patreon page is what helps keep the channel going. Please consider supporting me from $3.50 a month. You can interact with me there. We can discuss. You can suggest new content. And you get bonus content as well, including very soon some in-depth videos on topics from the books. Okay, thank you guys. Bye-bye.